All right, guys. So let's continue on with I believe it's part 3 of this chapter 7, Trump Tower, the Tiffany location. So we were talking about the marble that he used for developing the building. So now we're on the third element that adds to the drama of the atrium is one I actually fought against at first, making the entrance from Fifth Avenue unusually large. Zoning regulations required only a 15-foot width, and I didn't want to lose any more retail space that fronted on Fifth Avenue than I had to. However, the city pushed very hard for a 30-foot width, and finally, reluctantly, I went along. It cost me some very valuable retail square footage, but now I think that what I got instead, a spectacular entrance, was more than worth it. I give the City Planning Commission full credit for that. Zoning. I like to just zoning regulations, City Planning Commission. The last key element in the atrium was the waterfall that runs along the eastern wall. It's nearly 80 feet high and it cost almost $2 million to build. Most of my people at first favored putting paintings on the walls. To me, that was old-fashioned, unoriginal, and just not very exciting. As it turned out, the waterfall proved to be an art form in itself, almost a sculptured wall. Also, it attracts far more attention than we'd have gotten if we'd put up even some very wonderful art. If most malls succeed in part because they're so safe and homogeneous, I'm convinced that the Trump Tower atrium succeeds for just the opposite reasons. It's larger than life, and walking through it is a transporting experience, almost as if you're in a wonderland. Homogeneous, like they're all the same. Like if they're all safe and look the same. We tried to create a version of that feeling in the apartments themselves. The most dramatic element we had to offer, of course, was the views. Since the residential units didn't start until the 30th level, most were higher than the surrounding buildings, which meant they had views to the north of Central Park, to the south of the Statue of Liberty, to the east of the East River, and to the west of the Hudson. In addition, the sawtooth design of the building gave all the major rooms in the apartments views in at least 2 directions. And then to make sure we took the best advantage of those views, we built huge windows virtually from floor to ceiling. I would have made the windows all the way from floor to ceiling, but I was told that unless there was at least some base below a window, some people would get vertigo. The funny thing is that the inside of the apartments was less important than a lot of the other elements. We quickly discovered that the sort of buyer who spends $1 million for a 2-bedroom pied-à-terre or a $5 million for a 4-bedroom duplex is going to hire his own designer, gut the apartment, and rebuild it to fit his own tastes. In the end, so that's a pretty good one, right? They're going to hire his own designer, gut the apartment. That's true. In the end, the reason that we were able to charge unprecedented prices for the apartments was something beyond any specific luxuries were provided. It was the fact that through some blend of design, materials, location, promotion, luck, and timing, Trump Tower took on a mystical aura. Location, promotion, luck, timing, design, materials. A lot of buildings can be successful, but I'm convinced that only one at any given time can achieve the blend of qualities necessary to attract the best buyers and command the top prices. Before Trump Tower, the last building to achieve that mystique had been Olympic Tower on 51st Street off Fifth Avenue, built in 1970s. The key ingredient was the fact that Aristotle Onassis owned it. At the time, Onassis was living an amazing life. He was married to Jackie Kennedy and was the ultimate jet setter with mansions around the world, a huge yacht, and even his own island, Scorpios. He was very rich and very hot, and while Olympic Tower wasn't a particularly exciting or attractive building, it was the right product done by the right guy at the right time. It absolutely stole the top of the market from another luxury building that went up around the same time, the Galleria on East 57th Street. Right product done by the right guy at the right time. As it turned out, Trump Tower also stole the market from one potentially major competitor. Long before I made my deal for the Bonwit site, another developer announced plans to build a huge condominium tower above the Museum of Modern Art just off 5th Avenue at 53rd Street. By all rights, it should have been a fantastic success. The connection with the museum was very prestigious. The location was good. The architect Cesar Pelli was a big name, and the developer made it clear that he would spare no expense to build the best. However, Trump Tower far outsold Museum Tower. First of all, although we got started later on construction, we began selling apartments in Trump Tower around the same time that Museum Tower did. Museum Tower. Trump Tower. From the start, I could see we had some advantages. Obviously, we had a better location on 5th Avenue. But in addition, the shape of Museum Tower wasn't inspiring. The facade with its multicolored glass wasn't unusually striking, and the lobby was just another lobby. Finally, Museum Tower was marketed poorly. Their ads were dull, there was no attempt to create excitement, and it came off just as an average building. By contrast, we took our strengths and promoted them to the skies. From day one, we set out to sell Trump Tower not just as a beautiful building in a great location, but as an event. We positioned ourselves as the only place for a certain kind of very wealthy person to live, the hottest ticket in town. We were selling fantasy. The one market we didn't go after was old money New Yorkers who generally want to live in older buildings anyway. On the other hand, we could appeal to several other categories of wealthy people. Obviously, we were a natural choice for people connected with show business in the sense that we'd created something very glamorous. Foreigners were another big market: Europeans, South Americans, Arabs, and Asians. Practically speaking, we offered them an immediate advantage. At the time we began selling Trump Tower, it was virtually the only condominium in New York. To buy an apartment in a condominium, all you need is a purchase price. To buy cooperative, which is what most buildings in New York were at the time, you need approval from the board of directors, who have ridiculous, arbitrary powers, including the right to demand all kinds of financial data, social references, and personal interviews. Then they can reject you for any reason they choose without explanation. To buy a cooperative, it's a license to discriminate. The worst part is that many people on these co-op boards get their kicks from showing off their power. It's absurd and probably illegal, but it happened to be great for Trump Tower. Many wealthy foreigners didn't have the proper social references for these cooperatives, or didn't want to put themselves through the scrutiny of a bunch of prying strangers. Instead, they came to us. I still remember the morning just before we began selling apartments when one of my salespeople rushed into my office. "Mr. Trump," she said, "we're in trouble. Museum Tower just announced its prices and they're much lower than ours." I thought for a minute and realized that actually the opposite was true. Museum Tower had just done itself damage. The sort of wealthy people we were competing for don't look for bargains in apartments. They may want bargains in everything else, but when it comes to a home, they want the best, not the best buy. By pricing its apartments lower than ours, Museum Tower had just announced that it was not as good as Trump Tower. A lot of people think that we set out to attract celebrities to Trump Tower, that we hired a fancy public relations firm to promote the building. The truth is that we never hired anyone to do public relations, and every star who bought an apartment, Johnny Carson, Steven Spielberg, Paul Anka, Liberace, and many others, came to us. Nor did I give any of them special deals. Other developers cut prices to attract stars and celebrities, but to me that's a sign of weakness. What really means something is when a celebrity is willing to pay full price for an apartment. So let's just go through this real quick. I'm going to show you some pictures, show some pictures of his family. My father, Fred Trump, in a recent photograph. You see it? And then, with my sisters and brothers in 1951. Left to right, me, Freddie, Robert, Marianne, and Elizabeth. If you guys have made it this far, this is his older brother that died. Think of like alcoholism. Trump is the one all the way right here. The first boy. I don't know if that's the right or the left to you guys. The first boy standing up. And then that might be him right here. He's at the bottom. At age 12, inspecting the foundation for a 6-story building in Queens, New York. He's been true to this. He ain't new to this. You know what I'm talking about? And then we have at the New York Military Academy. Looks like he's holding the. He's the one in the middle. Looks like him, don't you think? And then, with my parents on the New York Military Academy grounds. This is him and New York Military Academy. Graduation photo, June 1964. And then leading the New York Military Academy contingent up 5th Avenue during the Columbus Day Parade, October 1963. This was my first real. This is my first real glimpse of prime 5th Avenue property. That's wild, huh? He's part of the military academy. He's walking to 5th Avenue, and he will later build one of the biggest buildings right there. Ivana as a top fashion model in Montreal, Canada, 1975. It's wild because like she kind of became ugly. She looks older than him, dude. She looks like a little boy, and this is her here. Looks like that would be like his mom or something. I looked up some pictures because she's around his age, you know, and Ivana, or not Ivana, Melania Trump, she's still beautiful. But she's younger than Trump. But she's gorgeous, and Ivana, she became like an ugly old woman, Loki. And this is in 1977, their honeymoon in Acapulco. So the top picture in 1975 at age 29, proposing a convention center for New York City on the 34th Street railroads or rail yards, for which I held an option. Success arrived in 1978 when the city and state chose my site over others that had been considered. Left, explaining to reporters why my site, the 34th Street rail yards, was the best location for New York City's convention center. June 1976, right, with architects Jordan Grusin and Dur Scott answering questions about the convention center at Hilton Hotel press conference, June 1976. 29 years old, dude. I'm 33. Look at this guy making moves right here. He's the one that built, it was his idea to make a convention center in New York. He's young, there's pops, you know. He already graduated from Wharton School of Finance and Economics, I think. Young, making moves, garnering attention from developers and financiers and banks and, you know, zoning, the city commission. Ribbon cutting at the reopening of the Woolman Rink, November 13, 1986, left to right. Toller Cranston, Michael Siebert, Judy Bloomberg, Debbie Thomas, Dorothy Hamill, Scott Hamilton, Borough President Dave Dinkins, Robert Douglas at the Chase Manhattan Bank, me, Commissioner Henry Stern, Mayor Koch, Aja Zanova Steinler, Dick Button, Jane Torville, Christopher Dean, Robin Cousins, Peggy Fleming. So at 1975 he was 29. So right here he was 39. They made he was part of or he took over. He if you guys came this far, remember he took over the development because they were taking forever to do it, too much money. Burning the mortgage after having raised more than $100,000 to save Mrs. Annabelle Hill's Georgia farm from foreclosure. Burning the mortgage. With Bob Hope and Ivana. In the vanguard of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Ticker Tape Parade up Broadway, May 1985, I feel strongly about supporting veterans and was proud to help underwrite both the parade and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial constructed in downtown Manhattan. Right here he said, I feel very strong about veterans. Signing running back Herschel Walker to play for the New Jersey Generals, September 23, 1983. At the Human Resources Center 20th Anniversary Celebrity Sports Night, May 29, 1986. Remember, he tried to compete with the NFL. This is when he helps some people like save their farm. He's burning the mortgage. He's at a dinner with his wife and Bob Hope. He's at a Vietnam Veterans Memorial Parade. So when he tried to go against the NFL and create his own football league. Herschel Walker was one of the biggest stars out of college. And right here he's with his wife at some dinner. With Mayor Ed Koch and my father, Ivana, and my mother, Mary Trump, at City Hall. Fifth Avenue Ticker Tape Parade that I put together to honor Dennis Conner and the crew of the Yacht Stars and Stripes for recapturing the coveted America's Cup and bringing it home from Australia. The parade brought over 500,000 New Yorkers out to cheer the victorious crew on a bitter cold day. The Macy's Parade. With friend and partner Lee Iacocca at a recent reception. Shooting a scene with Valerie Bertinelli for CBS's highly successful miniseries, I'll Take Manhattan, 1986. Being greeted by President and Mrs. Reagan, 1986. Remember, he wrote this book in his 40s, and 30 years later, he would be president. So the mayor, Koch, his mom and dad at a parade, Macy's Parade. His partner, Lee Iacocca, on some TV set, here meeting the president, Ronald Reagan. New York City's Jacob Javits Convention Center, constructed at the West 34th Street rail yards. I offered to oversee the construction, but the city and state went ahead on their own. Not surprising, the project came in years late and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. This is the convention center, the rail yards. He's the one that came up with the idea, and they didn't even allow him to do construction. The New York City's Jacob Javits Convention Center, constructed at the West 34th Street rail yards. I offered to oversee the construction, but the city and state went ahead on their own. Not surprisingly, the project came in years late and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. With the St. Moritz on one side of the avenue and Trump Park on the other, the Trump Organization now controls twin towers flanking the Avenue of the Americas at Central Park South. The Trump Organization now controls twin towers flanking the Avenue of the Americas at the Central Park South. So this is the convention center. It's all glass. Must have looked real modern back in the day. I don't know what that is. Right, model of Trump Park, generally considered the highest priced, fast-selling condominium in New York, containing luxurious apartments with vast terraces and all marble baths. Adjacent to Trump Park is 100 Central Park South, an elegant pre-war building comprising 80 rental apartment units. This is the Trump Park, highest priced, fastest selling condominium. It says it's a model, so I don't think this is real. It's a model. Left, model of Trump Plaza, 175 unit residential tower located near Bloomingdale's at 61st Street and 3rd Avenue on New York's Upper East Side. It's kind of crooked, isn't it? I guess it was kind of a cool building back then. They're still building buildings like this nowadays with the same model. You know that one that's been being graffitied on in Los Angeles. Two more photos. Model of the Grand Hyatt Hotel. This 34-story, 1,406-room luxury convention hotel is a $100 million development located on 42nd Street between Lexington and Park Avenues, adjacent to Grand Central Station. Grand Central Terminal restoration we carried out in 1979 during the construction of the adjoining Grand Hyatt Hotel. Grand Central Terminal restoration. So this is the Grand Hyatt that he helped build. And this is the restoration Look, he put Trump on it. That dude's name's everywhere probably in New York. Above, model of Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino on the boardwalk, Atlantic City's tallest hotel and one of the most successful hotel casinos anywhere. Right here. Trump Plaza. Above, October 23rd, 1986, the luckiest day of my life during reconstruction of a 2,700 car garage at the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. The boom of a huge crane reached out too far to pick up a 22-ton beam. The crane toppled over and a large section of the garage collapsed. Minutes before the accident, at least 100 workers were on the site. The crew had just left for a coffee break and no one was hurt. Dude, look at this. The crane fell. He says, the luckiest day of my life. A model of the 320 million Trump Castle Hotel and Casino located at Marina in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Under construction, the massive development is a major new tower containing a ballroom and a super luxury suites and a spectacular 600 slip marina complex. Because he's Mr. Casino Man, Atlantic City. But this is New Jersey, Atlantic City. My controlling interest in Resorts International includes the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, scheduled for completion in September 1988, which will be the largest hotel casino anywhere in the world, with a casino floor of approximately 120,000 square feet. As a developer, bro. Mar-a-Lago, our winter home in Palm Beach, Florida, was designed by Joseph Urban in the mid-20s for Marjorie Merriweather Post, the Post serial heiress. Post serial. This magnificent 118-room home sits on property that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean on the east to Lake Worth on the west, and it comprises 20 acres of perfectly landscaped lawns and a 9-hole golf course, citrus groves, a greenhouse, and cutting garden and guest houses, staff quarters, tennis courts, and a swimming pool. It is considered one of the most valuable parcels of land in the United States. No way. It's right here, both of these. Mar-a-Lago. I'm sure you can see better pictures on Google now that Google exists. One of the most valuable parcels of land in the United States. So right, Trump Plaza of the Palm Beaches, 260-unit deluxe condominium on the Intracoastal Waterway in Florida with spectacular views of Lake Worth and the Atlantic Ocean. I'm sure you might mention these in this book, I guess. So above, West Side Rail Yards, the largest undeveloped waterfront tract in Manhattan, encompassing approximately 100 acres and stretching from West 59th Street to West 72nd Street along the Hudson River. The projected site for Television City. On this site, we will be both the world's tallest building and the most advanced television production complex. Approximately 8,000 residential units, a major retail concourse, and more than 13 acres of beautifully landscaped recreational space, including a waterfront promenade. Because there were rail yards, but they don't have the rail yards anymore. Look at that. It looks like, from that aerial view, it looks like just a small piece of land that it just has capabilities of just, because look at, they built up, right? He's just looking to build up. Right there on the waterfront, just developing opportunities. So anyway, 10 more pages. Let's just, might as well finish this. Well, yeah, I don't have that many pages. We'll just do all this one video. If any press story about a celebrity helped promote Trump Tower, I suspect it was one about a sale that never actually occurred. Shortly after we began selling apartments, I got a call from a reporter asking whether or not it was true that Prince Charles had purchased an apartment in Trump Tower. It happened that this was the week when Prince Charles and Lady Diana had gotten married, and they were, at that moment, the most celebrated couple in the world. Our policy was not to comment about sales, and that's what I told this reporter. In other words, I refused to confirm or deny the rumor. Apparently, the reporter then decided to call Buckingham Palace. By this time, the royal couple had left for their honeymoon, and they were out on the yacht Britannia. So the Buckingham Palace spokesman said just what I had. They couldn't confirm or deny the rumor. That was all the media needed. In the absence of a denial, the story that the royal couple was considering buying an apartment in Trump Tower became front-page news all over the world. It certainly didn't hurt us, but I had to laugh to myself. Just a month earlier, Prince Charles had come to New York for a visit, and the IRA had come out in force to protest. As Prince Charles walked into Lincoln Center for a concert one evening, hundreds of protesters stood outside, hissing and screaming and throwing bottles. It had to be a frightening experience for him, and I can't imagine it left Prince Charles with the great desire to take an apartment in New York City. Also, while Trump Tower is a great building, I suspect Prince Charles would find it very hard to get used to any apartment after growing up in Buckingham Palace. With so much demand, our marketing strategy was to play hard to get. It was a reverse sales technique. If you sit in an office with a contract in your hand, eager to make the first deal that comes along, it's quite obvious to people that the apartments aren't in demand. We were never in a rush to sign a contract. When people came in, we'd show them the model apartments, sit down and talk, and if they were interested, explain that there was a waiting list for the most desirable apartments. The more unattainable the apartments seemed, the more people wanted them. As demand grew, I kept raising the prices 12 times in all. We started out selling for much more than Olympic Tower, which until then had been the most expensive building in New York. Within a short period, we almost doubled the price for the best apartments on the highest floors. People were buying 2-bedroom apartments for $1.5 million, and before we finished construction, we sold a huge majority of the apartments. The cycles of buyers at Trump Tower became something of a barometer of what was going on in the international economy. At first, the big buyers were the Arabs. When oil prices were going through the roof, then of course oil prices fell and the Arabs went home. In 1981, we got a sudden wave of buyers from France. I wasn't sure why, but then I realized the reason was that Francois Mitterrand had been elected president, and anyone smart and wealthy realized immediately that Mitterrand was going to hurt the French economy because they're moving. It wasn't just that he was a socialist and that he began nationalizing companies. It was also that he turned out to be a dangerous man. What can you say about a guy who goes around selling nuclear technology to the highest bidder? It's the lowest anyone can stoop. After the European cycle, we got the South Americans and the Mexicans when the dollar was weak and their economy still seemed fairly strong. Then when inflation set in, their currencies were devalued and their governments tried to restrict the outflow of cash. That cycle ended. During the past several years, we've had 2 new groups buying. One is Americans specifically, Wall Street types, brokers, and investment bankers who've made instant fortunes during the bull market frenzy. It's ridiculous when you think about it. You get stockbrokers barely 25 years old who suddenly earn $600,000 a year because clients they've never met call up and say, "I'll take 50,000 shares of General Motors." The broker pushes a button on the computer and presto, he's got a huge commission. As soon as the stock market falls out, which it will because it too runs in cycles, most of these guys will be out on the street looking for work. The other new buyers are the Japanese. I have great respect for what the Japanese have done with their economy. But for my money, they are often very difficult to do business with. For starters, they come in to see you in groups of 6 or 8 or even 12. And so you've got to convince all of them to make any given deal. You may succeed with 1 or 2 or 3, but it's far harder to convince all 12. In addition, they rarely smile and they are so serious that they don't make doing business fun. Fortunately, they have a lot of money to spend and they seem to like real estate. What's unfortunate is that for decades now, they have become wealthier in large measure by screwing the United States with the self-serving trade policy that our political leaders have never been able to fully understand or counteract. Did you hear that? What's unfortunate is that for decades now, they have become wealthier in large measure by screwing the United States with a self-serving trade policy that our political leaders had never been able to fully understand or counteract. Because the 263 apartments in Trump Tower proved to be so desirable, I decided to keep a dozen or so off the market, much the way a hotel operator always holds a few choice rooms for free for emergencies. Just like a hotel operator always holds a few choice rooms free for emergencies. It was a way of keeping options open, particularly my own. Originally, I decided to take one of The 3 penthouse triplexes on the top floors, about 12,000 square feet in all for my family. We moved in at the end of the 1983. I had offers as high as $10 million for each of the 2 apartments adjoining mine, but I resisted selling them, figuring I might ultimately want more space for myself. It proved true sooner rather than later. In the middle of 1985, I got an invitation from Adnan Khashoggi, a Saudi Arabian and a billionaire at the time, to come to his apartment in Olympic Tower. I went, and while I didn't particularly go for the apartment, I was impressed by the huge size of its rooms. Specifically, it had the biggest living room I'd ever seen. I had plenty of space in my triplex, but I figured, what the hell, why shouldn't I have exactly the apartment I wanted, particularly when I built the whole building? I decided to take over one of the other apartments on the top 3 floors and combine it with mine. It has taken almost 2 years to renovate, but I don't believe there was any apartment anywhere in the world that can touch it, and while I can't honestly say I need an 80-foot living room, I do get a kick out of having one. Successful as we were in selling the Trump Tower apartments to the top buyers, we did at least as well in attracting the best retailers to the atrium. It began when Asprey, a London-based store that sells the finest crystal jewelry and antiques, selected the atrium for its first branch store in 200 years of operation. At first, they took a small store in the atrium. Business was so good that they have since expanded to a much larger space. Quality, of course, attracts more quality. The next thing we knew, we had leases with many of the world's top retailers: Asprey, Charles Jourdain, Buccellati, Cartier, Martha, Harry Winston, and many others. It didn't hurt, of course, that in April 1983, just after the atrium opened, we got a good review from Paul Goldberger, who by then had replaced Ada Louise Huxtable as architecture critic of the Times. The review was headlined, "Atrium in the Trump Tower is a pleasant surprise." It began by saying, in effect, that other critics had been wrong. The atrium, Goldberger wrote, is turning out to be a much more pleasant addition to the cityscape than the architectural odds makers would have had it. The review went on to say that the atrium may well be the most pleasant interior public space to be completed in New York in some years. It is warm, luxurious, and even exhilarating, in every way more welcoming than the public arcades and atriums that have preceded it in buildings like Olympic Tower, the Galleria, and Citicorp Center. That review had 2 positive effects. First, it reinforced the feeling among the retailers in the atrium and the people who purchased apartments in Trump Tower that they'd made the best choice. But second, and more important, it helped bring more shoppers to the atrium. They, of course, were ultimately the key to the success. The odd thing is that no one could ever quite believe that the atrium was a commercial success. From the day it opened, false rumors circulated. One was that while it was obviously a tourist attraction, no one really bought anything there. Another was that the European retailers stayed only because their stores functioned as high visibility loss leaders. Still other stories had it that the stores on the ground floor did well, but those on the upper floors did not. As late as 1986, a New York Times reporter came to see me, obviously prepared to do a hatchet job on the atrium. Instead, he did his reporting and ended up writing a front-page business section story about the atrium's extraordinary success. Typically, a suburban mall has a turnover of at least a third of its original tenants during the first several years. Trump Tower lost only a handful of its stores during the first 3 years. More important, no sooner does a tenant leave than he is replaced by one of the 50 retailers we have on our waiting list. Stores with the most expensive merchandise in the world have prospered in the atrium. Not every quality retailer has found the location appropriate, of course. The best example is the experience of Lowe, the leather goods retailer, which was among the atrium's first tenants. Lowe had beautiful merchandise, but it turned out that while a wealthy woman might pay thousands of dollars for a piece of jewelry or an evening gown at a shop next door, she was not willing to shell out $3,000 for a pair of Lowe's leather pants, no matter how soft and buttery they might feel. So Lowe's didn't do well. But in the end, everyone came out okay. Asprey, which was doing very well next door, took over Lowe's space. Lowe, therefore, got out of a long-term lease. Asprey got an additional 4,600 square feet it very much wanted, and I got a great new lease. One last element helped make the Trump Tower deal a huge home run. That was something called a 421A tax exemption. Ironically, getting my 421A ended up taking me longer than it had to assemble the site and complete the entire construction of Trump Tower. Ironically, getting my 421A ended up taking me longer than it had to assemble the site and complete the entire construction of Trump Tower. The city enacted the 421A law in 1971 to encourage residential development. In return for improving a site, developers were entitled to an exemption from real estate taxes over a 10-year period. Every 2 years, the exemption decreased by 21%. Everyone who applied for the 421A exemption got it almost as a matter of course. Then I came along with Trump Tower. There was no question that I was entitled. I was proposing to take a 10-story building in a state of disrepair and to build in its place a multi-use 68-story, $200 million tower. Unlike the tax abatement I'd gotten on the Grand Hyatt, where I was forgiven all taxes, the 421A program wouldn't exempt me from taxes currently being paid on the site, but it would exempt me from additional taxes attributable to an increased assessed value on the site. Who could argue that I wouldn't be improving and better utilizing the site with Trump Tower? Ed Koch could, for one, and the reason had nothing to do with the merits of my case. It was all politics. Koch and his deputies sensed an opportunity they couldn't resist to position themselves as consumer advocates taking on a greedy developer. From a public relations perspective, I was vulnerable. It was quite obvious that Fifth Avenue wasn't exactly a marginal neighborhood, and that I'd probably succeed with Trump Tower even if I didn't get a tax exemption. But in my mind, none of that had any bearing on my legal right to a 421A exemption. In December 1980, I applied for a 421A for the first time. By 1980, a month later, I met with Tony Glideman, commissioner of the city's Department of Housing, Preservation and Development, to make my case in person. In March, Glideman and the HPD turned my application down. I called Koch and told him I thought the ruling was unfair, that I wasn't about to give up, and that the city was going to waste a huge amount of money litigating a case I'd eventually win. In April 1981, I filed something called an Article 78 proceeding in state Supreme Court seeking to have the city's ruling overturned. The court found in my favor, but an appellate court reversed the ruling. Like an appeals court? An appellate court reversed the ruling, so I took my case to the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. In December 1982, nearly 2 years after my original application, Court of Appeals is the highest court, the state's highest court. In December 1982, nearly 2 years after my original application, the Court of Appeals ruled 7-0 that the city had improperly refused me an exemption. But instead of simply ordering the city to expedite my exemption, the court told the city to reconsider my request. They did and turned me down again. But now I was so outraged that the cost of the litigation was beside the point. We refiled an Article 78. He didn't care. He's like, all right, just fighting, you know. And exactly the same scenario unfolded. We won in Supreme Court, got overturned at the appellate level, and ended up again before the Court of Appeals. My lawyer, Roy Kahn, did a brilliant job arguing before 7 justices without so much as a note. This time the court again ruled unanimously that we were entitled to our exemption and ordered the city to provide it without further delay. So they're fighting the city. That was just the icing on the cake. By this time, Trump Tower was an unqualified success. It had given me visibility and credibility and prestige. That was just the icing on the cake. By this time, Trump Tower was an unqualified success. Visibility, credibility, and prestige. It was also a great success financially. The way I figure it, the entire project, including land, construction costs, architecture fees, advertising and promotion, and finance charges, cost approximately $190 million. The sales of apartments have so far generated $240 million. Meaning that even before including revenues from stores and offices, we have earned a profit of approximately $50 million on Trump Tower. I also earned more than $10 million in commissions as a sales agent for apartments in Trump Tower. I also earned more than $10 million in commissions as a sales agent for apartments in Trump Tower. Finally, the rent from office space and the retail atrium generates many millions more a year, almost all of it profit. Ultimately, Trump Tower became much more than just another good deal. I work in it, I live in it, and have a very special feeling about it. And it's because I have such a personal attachment that I ended up buying out my partner, Equitable. In 1986, I work in it, I live in it, and I have a very special feeling about it. And it's because I have such a personal attachment that I ended up buying out my partner, Equitable. What happened is that Equitable put a new guy in charge of its New York real estate operation. One day this fellow called me up and said, "Mr. Trump, I've just been looking over the books and I'd like you to explain why we're spending so much on the maintenance of Trump Tower." We were in fact spending nearly $1 million a year, which is almost unheard of, but the explanation was very simple. When you set the highest possible standards, they're expensive to maintain. As one simple example, my policy was to have all of the brass in the atrium polished twice a month. Why, this fellow asked, couldn't we save some money by polishing once every couple of months? So this is the opening for him to want to buy it. At first I was civil. I tried to explain that one of the key reasons for the success of the atrium is that it was so impeccably well run. I also said I had no intention of changing our policy, and I suggested to this executive that perhaps he ought to take a day to think about whether he really wanted to push it. He called me back 24 hours later and he said he thought about it and he did want to go ahead with cutbacks. That was probably the end of my partnership with Equitable. He's thinking he wants to take money for himself. Much as I liked Equitable, I wasn't about to tamper with something so successful just to save a few bucks. I wasn't about to tamper with something so successful just to save a few bucks. To do that would have been totally destructive. I was upset, but I was also philosophical. I went to my friend George Peacock, the head of the real estate at Equitable, and I explained that we had a problem and that there didn't seem to be a way out of it. Therefore, I wanted to buy out Equitable's share. In a short time, we made a deal, and now I own Trump Tower outright. After we'd signed the contracts, I got a letter from George Peacock who ended by saying, "As with most things in life, time calls for change, and it is best to accept that fact. Nevertheless, I shall always be proud of my involvement in the creation of Trump Tower and fondly remember how we worked to bring it about." George Peacock. I was happy to get that letter. It was a classy way to conclude a partnership that had been a class act from the start. I don't know if you guys seen Trump just got shot a week ago. I don't know if you guys seen well, when he got shot, the bullet missed him and the other bullets hit somebody who was actually a fireman, and they paid honor to him at the RNC and they brought in his the man's suit he used to wear as a fireman. And Trump went, he kissed the helmet, and I thought it was actually kind of cute, because Trump's an old man, dude. It's like seeing your grandpa fucking do some, he kissed the helmet, and he moment of silence, but the way he patted the shoulder. It's just little things, And the way he talks about the Japanese, they were taking advantage of a free trade policy with America. But our politicians weren't smart enough to understand how they were doing it. Man, it's insane. He's not just Trump, the funny guy that people make fun of. You're fired. He's not that. He's not the clown we see through Hollywood,